Covering the islands of the Bahamas, ZNS Network presents The Bahamas Tonight.
The country's leader continues his assessment of the islands hardest hit by killer storm Sandy. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kendino Knowles, and this is the weekend edition of the Bahamas Tonight. The Prime Minister leads a delegation to more islands impacted by the storm. On his agenda today, the nation's second city. But yesterday, he visited islands in the central Bahamas. That's where the Hurricane Advisory Council got a first-hand look at the damage in Cat Island and Long Island. The team is made up of representatives from the Ministry of Works, NEMA, Red Cross, Social Services, the Defense Force, and other government agencies. LaDon Davis traveled with the team and tells that farmers lost lots of crop in Long Island and storm surge caused a big problem on Cat Island.
Just days after Hurricane Sandy battered the central Bahamas, assessment teams were dispatched to those islands hardest hit by the storm. In Long Island, Prime Minister Perry Christie talked about the importance of protection from the seas.
When we got to this site here, the question was, it needs obviously a seawall because you can see how low it is here, and you can see when a hurricane or storm coming from this direction goes in, and even though there's higher land here. And so as we move around, we're identifying areas that are vulnerable areas.
Island Administrator Therese Boodle-Bethel agrees. She says severe flooding in low-lying areas on the island is a major concern for residents, but is thankful that the island was spared from any further destruction.
The structures have fared well. We have shingle loss and minor roof damage for some of the homes. Some of the homes that had pre-existing conditions, they didn't fare too well, but we saw that the structure itself was already compromised. But going towards the south, for the most part, the water issue being low-lying issues and the debris on the road.
Some relatively bad news for the farming industry, though, as Hurricane Sandy caused major damage to crops like these bananas and vegetables. But according to Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources V. Alfred Bray, farmers should be able to get government assistance once an assessment is completed.
What I intend to do is to have agricultural officers visit Long Island between now and Thursday next week. Spend a day or two together with those officers who live here, so that we can get an independent assessment of the totality of the damage and the extent to which we are able to assist them in getting back on their feet again.
One of those farmers impacted by the storm is Schofield Miller. He says he lost thousands of dollars worth of crops stretched across his 2-acre farm. While this is not the first time his farm was hit by a storm, Miller says he is looking forward to the government's assistance.
The last hurricane, all of these, just like they are now, everything was to the ground, level to the ground. And I just went through and cut out all the trees and threw them out on the outside. And these are the suckers that came up. Now that's the same thing I'm planning to do with these. And another 8 months I'll begin to get bananas again. But this is the third, well, I would say the third time.
Just moments ago, we touched down here in Cat Island, and like the events of Hurricane Irene, the storm surge has actually destroyed the thoroughfare once again here in Cat Island during the wake of Hurricane Sandy. Now, I've been talking with government officials, and they are planning to once again restore the road here in Cat Island.
You know, if we go ahead and repair the road as is, and another storm comes, or even if it's a nor'easter, the road is going to get washed away. We're going to end up with the kind of damages, the kind of coastal erosion that we see. The way we solve that problem is to do what the government was engaged in, which is building a seawall to try and protect the coastal roads as much as possible. But at the end of the day, ultimately what is necessary for us in much of the family islands is that we have to relocate roads more inland.
Now, coastal erosion due to strong storm surges and severe flooding were major challenges in Cat Island. While driving, we noticed this newly constructed home adjacent to the shoreline had collapsed. But ironically, though, the house that NEMA built was still standing. Island Administrator Dawn Cornish says despite the impact, there was minimal damages.
We had most of our damage along the coast, heading between Smiths Bay, which is right up the street, and Stevenson. And that was primarily just the tidal surge coming in, and it affected the power lines and BTC's lines as well. The roads are passable for the most part, with the exception of one of the poles that came down in the Stevenson area. And when I was up there earlier, they had a backhoe and they were trying to raise it because they have some issues with equipment at BC, apparently. But power has been restored to a portion of the island.
It may take a few weeks, months, or even years before farmers fully reproduce their crops in Long Island and for the roadway in Cat Island to be fully repaired. But officials of the Hurricane Advisory Committee say they will work swiftly to ensure that everyone directly affected by the storm not only gets back to normalcy, but receive the assistance they are entitled to. LaDawn Davis, ZNS News Network.
Well, Hurricane Sandy now to blame for another casualty, this time on Grand Bahama, where scores of residents are in search of shelter. The island took a pounding from the storm with strong winds, rain, and high tidal surge. Our Joan Davis Roll has more from the north.
A day after the destructive force of Hurricane Sandy descended on Grand Bahama, resulting in the death of a Queens Cove resident, forced the closure of roads, the evacuation of communities due to flooding, and left many residents distressed, officials of the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, gathered to give an overview of how this island fared. Leading the charge at the press conference held at NEMA's office in the National Insurance Building was the Minister for Grand Bahama, the Honorable Dr. Michael Dowell.
Once again, throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, through the grace of God, we have fared well as a result of the devastating effects of Hurricane Sandy. The update from meteorologist Cook James clearly indicate that Hurricane Sandy is now past the northern tip of the island of Abaco and is now moving northward into the Atlantic Ocean. This is good news for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, but we must not let our guards down because we are still experiencing some of the effects of Hurricane Sandy.
Minister Dowell reported on the loss of life and the destruction of other areas.
Reports coming from West End to Sweetens Key is clearly indicating severe flooding to the northern side of the island of Grand Bahama. Grand Bahama has officially, to my understanding, reported its first death in the Queens Cove area, and it is that of an elderly man who resides in the northern part of Queens Cove. All emergency support teams are on the road assessing the situation on the island of Grand Bahama, and all of our shelters from West End to Sweetens Key is still officially open. Reports from West Grand Bahamas confirm that many residents had to be evacuated from the northern part of the island more towards the Boodle Bear area, and I got a recall about 10 minutes ago of someone who was still in the process of evacuating some individuals who have experienced severe flooding.
Minister Dowell reported that Grand Bahama power officials, along with GB Utilities, were working feverishly to restore electricity and water supply to the island.
The Grand Bahama Power Company is also assessing the extent of the damages, and the Grand Bahama Utility Company have sent their team to their necessary wells to determine exactly what is the extent of their damage.
Immediately following the press conference, the minister conducted another assessment. This included the search for vital commodity, an abundant supply of drinking water, followed by a return to the area leading into West Grand Bahama, the Fishing Hole Road, a thoroughfare which remained closed for the second consecutive day, but despite warnings saw motorists risking their lives to cross.
I had to go in four-wheel drive.
To get out. All right, so no recommendation to pass through an ordinary vehicle?
No,
all right. Okay, thanks a lot.
The lack of residents heeding the warnings was also a major issue for officials. Foremost on the minds of many, though, was the death of a Queens Cove resident who, despite a personal plea by the minister, refused to evacuate.
Very much a sad situation. Emergency vehicle was in the area. We made contact with the gentleman. He insisted that he didn't want to leave. It's always sad. It tells us right away here in Grand Bahama that the low-lying areas of Grand Bahama, we should have a mandatory evacuation prior to a hurricane. That death was, as far as I'm concerned, was avoidable.
Massive flooding here on the island of Grand Bahama, obviously a major concern for residents. Now it's all about recovery. This as residents try to pick up the pieces of their lives following the passage of Hurricane Sandy. Reporting for ZNS Network News, I'm Joan Davis Roll.
Well, Hurricane Sandy brushed up the island of Exuma on Thursday afternoon, and our Julian Gibson was in the midst of it all. In this report, he takes a look at the damage to the eastern part of that island.
Flooding at the runabout entrance at the Morristown International Airport was the first sign I saw that Hurricane Sandy was upon Exuma. A utility pole dangerously hung over the street As a result, the electricity supply to certain settlements of Exuma was out. A trip to Mount Thompson, I saw banana trees that took a pounding from the hurricane. In the settlement of the Curtis, these young men not taking any chance trying to make the necessary preparations. It was about 12 noon on Thursday when Hurricane Sandy made landfall in Williamstown, Exuma. In Georgetown, in a matter of minutes, the streets became flooded. In front of the Palm Bay Resort, it was like a swimming pool. Despite the streets being covered with water, vehicles still trying their best to maneuver through it. Even these tourists took a chance in the wet conditions. Now, it was on Friday morning when we visited Williamstown and we saw that they had damage to several rooftops, electrical lines down, utility poles leaning, and 3 10,000-gallon water holding containers that supplied water to Williamstown was tossed about in the bushes. Williamstown Primary School ceiling in one of the classrooms also collapsed during the storm. A trip to the settlement of Forbes Hill saw numerous houses that had roof damage that resulted in flooding. From the kitchen to the bathroom to the bedroom, many homes in Forbes Hill got drenched by the storm when they lost roof shingles.
There were some damages, but thank God we can overcome those. We had some damages, especially in the little Exuma area. That area seemed to have been hit the hardest because the western end was not damaged as much as the eastern end. That group, a number of them needs tarpaulin for their houses.
We've noticed that a lot of the shingles are off on a lot of the buildings, that they are actually leaking when you come inside, but you cannot see it outside. So it's difficult to determine exactly what's happening outside, but when we went inside, we've noticed that a lot of those houses, they're really damaged.
Exuma breathing a sigh of relief. Reporting for the ZNS News Network, I am Julian Gibson.
All right, the Bahamas Electricity Corporation restoring power to 97% of its customers in New Providence with full restoration by tomorrow night. Senior officials expect that the entire country will be up and running in the coming days.
BEC executives telling ZNS News that crews in New Providence are working expeditiously to restore supply to the 3% of New Providence customers who remain without power and hope to have their supply restored by late tomorrow. A team of 87 BEC technicians have been working around the clock to get power back up across the country. But sadly, one of those men had a close call this morning while trying to restore a downed power line in Exuma.
He made contact with the power line while in the carrying out some restoration efforts. That matter is presently under investigation, so we would not want to say any more than that at this point in time.
According to BEC's chairman Leslie Miller, that worker has since been airlifted to the capital and is receiving treatment at the Princess Margaret Hospital.
When you talk about electrical works, it is not an easy thing to do, and it's very dangerous, and we urge Bahamians. We had calls all morning with people saying there's lines down, and we asked them, please do not touch those lines.
BEC teams spent most of the day in areas like Sea Breeze, Eastern Road, Imperial Park, and Coconut Grove to get customers in those areas back online. But BEC customers in some of the hardest hit islands may have to wait a little while longer before their supplies are fully restored.
Abaco, 80% of electricity is restored. In Abaco Keys, Grand Turtle Key, 85% is restored. An assessment is remaining on the other keys associated with Abaco. Cat Island, where we had some problems there, 60%, but that's being dealt with now. Long Island, approximately 85%, and Long Island was hit pretty hard also.
BEC General Manager Kevin Bazin explains that infrastructural damage was not that great in the Family Islands and explains what the restoration efforts entailed.
Well, in terms of repair of the overhead system, it's specialized work. We did have a number of poles, a small amount of poles that were down that had to actually be replaced or changed. We had one or two situations where there may have been a fire at the top of the pole and the pole head may have burnt off, so we had to do some replacement.
Now, Mr. Bazin explains that since this storm did not bring much lightning, there was not much damage to any of its transformers. Well, the country's water count going up another notch. We'll have the details when we return.